Welcome to Treadmill Talks with Shannon Maves, a podcast for athletes and fitness enthusiasts to pass the time during mind-numbing cardio while I use my no-bullshit coaching style to educate, inspire, and entertain. I'm your host, Shannon Maves. Now let's walk and talk. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me for episode 50 of Treadmill Talks, the one about choosing a show. I figured this was a good time to record an episode about choosing a show because, well, a lot of competitors are starting to plan out their season this time of year. The holidays are over. We're getting back into our usual routines. Spring shows have already been posted on the NPC website, and more shows are being announced for summer and fall. It's an exciting time of year for competitors. But how do you know which shows you should or shouldn't compete in? There's actually quite a few things you might want to consider. Outside of the more obvious what works with your own schedule, of course. That's the first thing that you should consider when you're deciding on a show. You've got to make sure that it works with your personal and work schedule. You don't want to plan for a show and then find out a few weeks beforehand that you have a work trip that you forgot about or something. And you don't really want to plan a show when you have a vacation like a week or two before either. Because that's when you need to make sure that everything is dialed the fuck in. It's not a time to relax on your plan and let loose. And if you've never competed before, heads up. Those last 4 to 6-ish weeks before your show are usually pretty tough. A lot of times, food and energy get pretty low. So you don't really want to plan a show that's within 6 weeks after you have something big going on that maybe requires a lot of physical or emotional energy either. That's one of many reasons why I pulled out of prep last summer when I was just 5 weeks out from my first competition. I knew that there was no way in hell I was going to have the physical, mental, or emotional energy to do everything I needed to do to be able to move from Arizona to Florida while I was pushing hard as fuck to compete at a high level. Obviously, if your goal is more just to do it for the sake of doing it and it's just for fun or a bucket list type of thing, then you can be more flexible with yourself. But I'm speaking more about the competitors who are in it to win it. When you're looking at your schedule to plan a show, you're going to want to consider more than just the date of the actual show. You're going to want to make sure that you can be 110% on plan those last couple of months before your show. You're going to want to make sure that you don't have any crazy shit going on during peak week. And you're also going to want to consider the few weeks post-show as well, because reverse dieting is hard as fuck. A lot of competitors even consider it to be harder than prep itself. So do you really want to be going through a reverse diet during the holidays when temptation is a lot higher? Those are all things you're going to want to consider as far as your schedule. But remember to be reasonable about things too, because there's never going to be a perfect time to prep. You're going to have to work around some things. That's just kind of how life works. You also need to be realistic about your timeline. If you've never competed before, then it can be hard to know how much weight you need to lose to be truly stage lean, which is one reason why a lot of first-time competitors don't come in lean enough. It's not necessarily because they didn't work hard enough or because their coach didn't know what they were doing. It's because they didn't have any type of baseline to gauge things off of. But once you've competed and you have kind of a ballpark idea of where you need to be, it's a lot easier to plan out a realistic timeline. Realistic being the key word there. Improvement season can look different for everyone, and I'm not the person who's going to sit here and shame you for gaining too much weight during your improvement season, because it may have been necessary for you physically and or mentally. But if you have 30 pounds to lose, you're going to need a very long prep. Because when the goal is to lose body fat while maintaining as much lean mass as possible, which is exactly what you're doing during a competition prep, the standard baseline goal is to lose about 1% of body weight each week, which for most people typically ends up being around 1 to 2 pounds per week. Anything faster than that typically results in pretty substantial loss of muscle mass, which then means you have to lose even more weight to get lean enough. And that's when you come in looking stringy as fuck. And it's not a good look, I promise. But losing less than 1 or 2 pounds per week can make prep a much more long and drawn out process than it already needs to be, oftentimes resulting in athletes feeling frustrated and sometimes quitting altogether, or being stubborn about what show they want to do and then not coming in lean enough. When we're talking about female competitors, though, we're usually looking at closer to the 1 pound a week mark, maybe 1.5 pounds per week during the beginning of prep when body weight is on the higher end. So this does make the math fairly simple. If you need to lose 30 pounds to get to your predicted stage weight, then you're going to need to prep for at least 30 weeks, if not more. Because some weeks you might not lose any weight, whether it's stress from work or because you got a cold and can't train for a few days or whatever other crap life might throw at you. There's always potential for bumps along the way. And it's better to have a little wiggle room to account for that kind of stuff. Plus, your goal stage weight is usually just a ballpark anyway. Even seasoned competitors can have their actual stage weight fluctuate. You might not hit what you thought your stage weight was going to be and realize that, oh shit, I still need to lose another 3 to 5 pounds. Which is why I recommend adding on a couple of extra weeks to those 30 weeks for those just in case type scenarios. If you're lucky and everything goes absolutely swimmingly and you find yourself stage ready before your show day, then you are in a phenomenal position. Because that means you get to cruise into your show while bringing food up and training intensity down. And that type of well-rested and well-fed package looks good on stage. Now, if you didn't gain 30 pounds during improvement season and you only have, let's say, 10 pounds to lose, then you can obviously plan for a much shorter prep. But scheduling a show that fits your work and life events, in addition to setting a realistic timeline for yourself, are the two biggest things you're going to want to consider when choosing a show. After that, you'll want to kind of consider whether or not you're willing to travel. Obviously, doing a show close to home is ideal, especially if it's your first show or you're trying to budget a bit tighter or something. But depending on where you live, sometimes that's not an option. So you might want to look at shows that are within driving distance or where you have a free place to stay or something. For instance, as of right now, there are no longer any NPC shows in Tucson. Hopefully that changes soon, but a lot of Tucson competitors are driving up to Phoenix to compete. Or if they're willing to drive a bit further, they'll go to Vegas, LA, or San Diego, since that opens up an even more flexible schedule and timeline. And if you're willing to fly for a competition, well, then that obviously opens up a lot more opportunity. Like a lot more. Because there are multiple NPC shows every weekend for the vast majority of the year. So if you decide that, yeah, okay, I'm cool with doing a show anywhere in the country, then you might want to start looking at other things to consider, like the size of the competition. Obviously, there's no way of truly knowing how big a show is going to be because most promoters allow people to register the day before the show, and competitors can always pull out of a show at the last minute too. But typically you can get an idea of how big a show is going to be by looking at the NPC website and seeing how many people competed in previous years at that same show. This is also a good strategy to get a feel for how competitive a show is going to be. If you look at the photos from the previous years of the same show, you can generally see what level of competition is showing up. Again, this can obviously change from year to year, but it's a good way to gauge things. And this is something where there is no right or wrong answer as far as what kind of show you're looking at doing. If you're just competing for funsies and want a more relaxing day, then I'd probably recommend a smaller, less competitive show. But if you're in it to compete and you want to get your national qualification or something, then I would recommend seeing how you stack up against other competitive athletes and probably doing a bigger show. And if you're really serious about hitting the national circuit, then you're going to want to pick a show that is going to have some national judges on the panel if possible. For female competitors, I would highly recommend looking for a show that Sandy Williamson is judging. Sandy is the head female judge for all of the NPC and the IFBB. She knows her shit. And it would be great to get in front of her so that you're on her radar before you go to nationals. Plus, she is an actual fucking angel, I swear, because she always stays after every single show to give each competitor individual feedback. It's truly above and beyond of her and so valuable for anybody who wants to go far in the sport. You can also get a feel for how a show is going to be run based on who is promoting it. If they are a big name themselves, having been promoting shows for a while and have multiple shows per year, then chances are it will be a pretty big but pretty well-run show. Chances are. Don't quote me on that, okay? Because sometimes a super random show with a lesser-known promoter ends up being huge just because it's the first one of its kind in a smaller city or something. So all of the competitors in that area will show up because they're excited that they don't have to drive or fly to compete. Now, let me be clear and say that there are always exceptions to this. This is not always the case. But typically what I have found is that the smaller shows are smaller for a reason, and the bigger shows are bigger for a reason. Meaning that the bigger shows are usually more of a fun experience. They're generally run more smoothly and efficiently, and there's usually a more highly qualified judging panel. But like I said, this is not always the case. I have seen shows blow up and become way bigger than even the promoters anticipated, causing things to get a little out of hand and therefore not being run as efficiently. I've also seen phenomenal small shows with great judging panels. But again, just kind of look at previous years and see how many people showed up, what the competition was like, and who the judges were. And if you're able to, talk to other competitors who were there to see what their experience was like. Oh, one thing I should have mentioned earlier about picking a show is to look at what divisions are being offered. Nowadays, there are some more specialized shows, like all-female shows, or shows that have separate classes for first responders or military, which could be super fun for you to do multiple classes if you're interested in doing that. You obviously want to be aware of picking a show that actually offers your division, though, because if you start your prep and you go to register for the show a few weeks before and you realize that they're only offering wellness and figure and not bikini, you're going to be pretty bummed. Or if you're hoping to compete in masters, you may want to double check which masters classes they're offering. Sometimes they have 35 plus, 40 plus, 45 plus, 50 plus, and even more than that. But other times they only offer 40 plus and maybe 50 plus or just 50 plus or whatever combination of those ages that they feel like offering. If it's your very first show and you want to compete in as many classes as possible, then look for a show that offers True Novice. That's a class that is only for first-time competitors who have never stepped foot on stage before, and not every show offers that class. Also take into consideration whether or not you want to do a show that is just an amateur competition or if you want to compete at a pro-am show. Those can be super fun because seeing the pros do their thing is truly on such a different level. But I will say that pro-am shows are a very different vibe than a show that is just for amateur competitors. There's typically a more experienced judging panel, which brings a higher level of competition, even to the regional level. And it can honestly be just a bit more of an intense experience. It really all just depends on what you want to get out of your show day experience. Hopefully you've got a coach who will help guide you along when picking a show. But if you're looking at competing at a national show, then you're going to be a lot more limited when it comes to everything that I've mentioned. Because there's only so many national shows per year. And all of them are going to be big and competitive. And for most people, competing nationally means having to travel a ways away. So that's when it's really most about schedule and timeline, which are the two main things I recommend considering anyways. And there's always going to be personal things to consider too. If you're a little more flexible with your schedule and perhaps willing to travel, my best suggestion would be to start your prep with a window of time in mind. Don't be so laser focused on doing one specific show and refuse to pivot just because you set your heart on that one. Shoot for a time frame where there are a few shows you would be interested in doing, and then see how your prep goes. If you get close to that time frame and realize you still need more time, then compete at one of the later shows. If all goes well and you're ready to go early or you're right on time, then compete at that first one. And maybe do multiple shows if you're still feeling good after the first one. I know from personal experience with myself and with my clients that setting your sights on one show can work against you because shit happens. Life happens. Death happens. Sometimes you just need more time. And it doesn't always mean that you or your coach did anything wrong. Sometimes we just need to listen to what the universe is telling us to do. It can be hard as fuck to pull out of a show that you were hoping to do. Trust me, I know I've had to do it twice now, but I promise it feels a hell of a lot better getting on stage knowing that you held off in order to look your absolute best than getting on stage just for the sake of getting on stage and being in way over your head, knowing that if you had just given yourself more time, you could have come in looking a hell of a lot better. Trust me. Learn from my mistakes and don't make them yourself, okay? And please share this episode with anyone you know who may need help choosing a show, or share it to your social media for even more people to see. Because someone might see your post and send it to their friend who needs help choosing a show. Or if you want help deciding on a show that suits you, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to give you the best information I can about whatever shows you're considering doing. And if you want to work with a coach who is going to work with you to compete at a show that works for you, then click the link on the show notes to apply to work with me. Thank you for listening to Treadmill Talks. If this episode taught you something, lit a fire under your ass, or at least helped you forget how long you've been walking in place, please leave a review or take a screenshot to share on your social media. Don't forget to tag me at Shannon Maves so I can give you some love right back. And thanks again for listening to my Treadmill Talk.